A recent report from Statistics South Africa titled Marginalized Groups, Series 7, the social profile of the youth 2014-2024, highlights the challenges faced by South African youth. Despite making up a significant portion of the labor force, high unemployment persists, primarily due to a skills mismatch. For more insight, we're joined now by Kanakana Mudzanani, SA Youth Economic Council President. Good to have you, Kanakana, and thank you very much for coming on. When you look at now what we would call, I suppose, a draft budget, because it was immediately released and thrown into the dustbin because it was taken for a review, what did you see in there that you would believe would have addressed this particular question of youth unemployment?
Good afternoon, Thabo, and good afternoon to your viewers as well. And thank you so much for having us here. And we would like to convey our condolences to the Fugard family. Ethel Fugard is one of the authors that contributed to the agenda of nation building in our country through theatre and drama. Nonetheless, Thabo, I think on behalf of the South African Youth Economic Council, we fully believe that there is a need to craft a budget that is going to support programs which will effectively intervene to the agenda of youth development in South Africa, particularly when it pertains to the issue of funding higher education, the issue of youth unemployment, as well as skilling the youth in many other fields. But it is quite sad, Thabo, that the draft budget that was supposed to be presented by Minister Godongwana had no clear intention of supporting the agenda of free higher education. It had no clear plan on how it was going to assist us in resolving the question of youth unemployment. So as a council, we believe that the postponement of the budget could, in one way or the other, positively reflect a budget that is going to be progressive and represent as well as champion the interests of young people. And we have already made it clear that a budget that seeks to spike or hike the VAT in the midst of a high cost of living crisis is not something that we are intending on supporting as young people of this country.
Yeah, I mean, the report that I mentioned from Statistics South Africa seems to point to that education remains a crucial factor in employment outcomes, and it would be disappointing to see that we still don't have a solution to address this question of education. I mean, we might be getting free higher education at this particular point, but the number of students that are being admitted is still not enough because just there's no space at universities.
Well, I mean, to say that we've got free higher education is a bit of a push, but what we can acknowledge is that there has been improvements in terms of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme insofar as it being a loan scheme is concerned. However, we must fundamentally raise it, Thabo, that Treasury needs to stop viewing higher education as a cost, but rather as a social investment, because when you invest in higher education, you do get to skill young people. And if you look at the report by Stats SA, it acknowledges the fact that, yes, youth unemployment is a harsh reality. However, unemployment amongst graduates is quite low. So there is a correlation between graduates and employability. And the government must indeed support higher education, because we want programs that are going to respond to our socio-economic needs, programs that are intentful, that they do not want to keep South Africans in a perpetual cycle of being recipients of social programs, but creating a citizenship that is able to stand on its own and sustain itself, Thabo, which is why we believe that funding higher education should not be a question. But over and above that, we have long made calls as the South African Youth Economic Council that Treasury, alongside the Minister of Finance, must work towards making sure that the PFMA and the MFMA are amended to make sure that we procure goods and services that are manufactured or produced domestically, since you would know that government is the largest procurer of goods and services in our country. This would enable SMMEs, Thabo, to create jobs and to also be sustainable. If a Venda district municipality, for instance, does not need a foreign entity to do its auditing services such as KPMG, you can be rest assured that an audit firm within the region itself would be able to benefit from such programs and therefore contribute to the economic development of the district itself.
Yeah. Though higher education enrollment, I don't have to tell you, I'm sure you're watching those numbers, would have increased at least in the 2014-2023 space by 1.3%. So more enrollments are happening. There is, however, some areas of decline. Enrollment in technical and vocational education and training colleges dropped by 0.8%. How do you read that? To what would you attribute that kind of drop?
Look, I think what is quite important, Thabo, is that ourselves and the viewers of the Newzroom Africa must also do this. If you go and look at, firstly, the budget speech in 2018, which increased VAT by 1%, the then Minister of Finance made it clear that the VAT hike was being made so that we can support free higher education in South Africa. And this would obviously go as far as making sure that there are more available spaces for people with post-matric qualification in institutions of higher learning. Yes, we note the increase, but we believe that much more must be done. If you go and listen to the President's State of the Nation's address in 2019, he made a clear promise that we are going to capacitate the higher education sector by building new institutions of higher learning. And he pinpointed particularly to a university focusing on science and technology in Ekurhuleni. What we believe should happen from a council perspective is that Treasury must be able to give us a budget that is going to make sure that such promises are implemented and that such programs are driven with the much needed speed, Thabo. Over and above this, we fully believe as the South African Youth Economic Council that Treasury must acknowledge the fact that South Africa cannot only rely on taxation as its source of revenue. We need to go ahead with the establishment of a sovereign wealth fund that is going to invest in rail infrastructure, that is going to invest in finance, that is going to invest in other sectors that will assist the state to generate income on its own that will be able to capacitate the country's fiscals. Because as you see today, Thabo, the reason why the postponement was made is because the Minister of Finance and Treasury are saying that we do not have enough to support the programs that we want to roll out as government, and as such we must hike that. But we fully believe that days of only relying on taxation as your source of revenue are beyond us as South Africa, and we need more innovative ways of supporting our fiscals. And then the last point I want to make, Tower, and the viewers of Newzroom Africa as well, is that as a country, whilst we acknowledge that there is a need to offer social protection to people, we need to relook at our social intervention insofar as assisting the poor is concerned, particularly because we cannot build a social protection system that does not assist those who are its recipient today to be better economic contributors tomorrow. For instance, if you look at the SRD grants that are highly contested today, you would acknowledge that, yes, they do play a role in terms of shielding the poor from issues of hunger and food insecurity. However, the money that is being given to them is not sufficient, and it could have been used to roll out a much more meaningful program that would support young people. Whilst we agree that social protection is important, we also need to start having a conversation around the sustainability of our country's social stand. And this is not a conversation that the ruling party of the government, rather, must not be afraid to honestly engage on with citizens. Because if we do not engage on it, we are going to continuously spend more on social welfare whilst we are not seeing the return on what we would believe is a social investment.
Kanakana Mudzanani, SA Youth Economic Council President, we appreciate your time and your intervention this afternoon on some of the expectations, certainly to the budget speech, which will be delivered on Wednesday this week by Minister Enoch Godongwana, following, of course, an unprecedented postponement, first ever in the history of the new South Africa, if you like, that a budget speech would have been postponed. This, as the DA says, there's still no consensus on the however marginal VAT hike that is being proposed. So Wednesday would be the day when Cabinet will sit still around the table in the morning to decide on that. We'll get more reaction to the budget from Build One South Africa leader Musi Maimane in the next hour. Stay with us.